This was an absolutely crazy week in college basketball. 19 of the AP top 25 teams lost at least once this week. But there's a lot of movement, a lot of concern from fans, rightfully so. So let's crack down to it. Speaking of upsets, which upset was the most shocking yesterday? This refers to Saturday. Creighton win surprised me a lot because they were playing in stores at UConn, where the Huskies are just so good. It's clearly not a massive gap between the quality of these two teams, but I was still nonetheless surprised that Creighton won. But I'd probably go with the Gonzaga loss at home Saturday night to Santa Clara. This is one of those prototypical games that Gonzaga just takes care of. They're playing in the WCC at home against a team who they are probably better than, even though they lost to them at home. Speaking of Gonzaga, shout out to my guy Jaden Bediako, Seton Hall and Santa Clara legend. With Gonzaga's loss to Santa Clara, how many bids can the WCC get this year? 2 or 1? I think the West Coast Conference is still fine and on track for 2 bids. Gonzaga, even with all their struggles, still have a good enough resume to get an at-large bid, and I don't see them falling off enough to become a bubble team truly. St. Mary's has quietly been winning a lot of games. They've been beating up a lot of lesser teams, so their resume as of right now is just on the right side of the bubble to be in, so that would be 2. With teams like Santa Clara and San Francisco and Oregon State beating the other top teams, it'd be crazy to think that there couldn't be even a 3rd bid possibly if one of those teams was to win the WCC tournament. Because of the usual Gonzaga and St. Mary's, I'd say that 2 is probably safe and expected still as of right now. Yes or no, the Zags championship window has closed. The recent lack of high school recruiting and disappointing teams. At this rate, it's pretty clearly not going to happen this year like I honestly thought they might have been able to. To give a definitive answer, I would say no, the championship window isn't closed. If they had no plans to leave the WCC, I'd probably be pretty worried and say that, yeah, it's probably leaning towards closed. But they're going to go to the Pac-12, which one obviously brings more resources, more money, more funding for everything to recruit at higher levels, but also the competition is going to be better. The Mountain West is a better conference than the WCC, so now you take the Mountain West and throw Gonzaga and a couple teams into it, and it's a borderline power conference if it's not a power conference for sure. And I think that's a big part of their inability to win a national championship. Historically, national champions come from conferences with, I think it's 4+ teams in the tournament, which the WCC basically never gets. So Gonzaga might have had the quality. Well, no, they definitely had the quality to win national championships 3, 4, maybe even 5 different years in the last decade. They get the WCC play, and for the most part that we've seen when they were at their best, they would just kind of coast through those games for 2.5 months until they get to March, and then they get thrown into the mix with one of those great power conference teams, and they kind of can't get across the line. Short answer, no, I don't think the championship window is closed, but it's easy to be concerned, and it's fair. Give me tiers at the top of the Big Ten, especially after the Illinois-Michigan State game. Tier listing the Big Ten is psychotic because the conference is an absolute nightmare to rank. It changes every week. Teams are all over the place. The margins are super thin, but ask and you shall receive. So here we go. Put Michigan State, Illinois, and Purdue as the tier 1 contenders in the top. They're definitely top 5 teams for sure. And then go Michigan and Oregon up next. They're pretty polar opposites. Oregon has been consistently really good for most of the year, and Michigan has been very inconsistent, but at their peak, their ceiling is great. Their upside is awesome. I'd go Wisconsin, Maryland, and UCLA in that 3rd tier, although Wisconsin has been winning and succeeding at a higher rate, so they're borderline the next one. This is where it starts to get really messy. Ohio State, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Penn State, and Northwestern, I'd say, are like those terror teams. They can probably beat anyone in the conference on a given day, but they can probably lose to anyone in the conference on a given day. Put Rutgers and USC not far off of that group at all, and maybe even in that group. There's a spark in both those teams. They have both beaten some of the better teams in the conference already, but they've also both shown such drastic downside this season, so it's kind of tough. And then that leaves Minnesota and Washington at the bottom. Really only the 2 teams truly with no upside to do damage in the Big Ten, and they're probably going to end up missing the Big Ten tournament because they only play with 15 teams, and now there's 18 teams in the conference. Just like there's 18 teams, there's a lot of beating each other up, a lot of in-conference cannibalism. There's no clear top 1 team that's better than everybody, but the conference is good, and honestly they should have about 10, maybe 11 teams in the tournament come March. Sticking in the Big Ten, how realistic is a Michigan State run to the Final Four without a 3-point shot? I just told you Michigan State is a tier 1 team in the conference, and if I had to pick one team as the best team in the league, I would go with Michigan State right now. They're 16-2, they're 7-0 in conference, the only undefeated team in the Big Ten right now. Their shooting is the obvious thing that holds them back and will hold them back. 28.8% from 3 is 340th in the country. It's basically dead last. They have the shooters and the ability, and they are generating some pretty decent looks as of lately. And they've even had games where they shoot it well. So that upside for them to shoot is there. They just don't do it consistently. I think where that's going to be a big problem is in the tournament. In Big Ten play, you're playing a lot more dogfights and teams that play similar styles to them, but in the tournament, in the round of 32, Sweet 16, Elite 8, when they play a team like Alabama or Kentucky that just opens it up and they're very hard to defend even for them, and you have to kind of play into this offensive shootout, like, I don't have confidence that Michigan State can stay in one of those games, and if not two of them in back-to-back in the tournament. They have a really high floor because they're going to beat lesser teams pretty easily. They're going to beat other teams that like to grind out wins like they do. And like I said, I truly believe that they can shoot it, and that potential is there. So if they can be nationwide average or even close to it, like 34, 35%, like, that's going to be awesome for them. They're a top 10 team in the country, and they can go to the Final Four for sure, but only time will tell. What is your biggest takeaway from the Iowa State Cyclones from chatting with Curtis Jones? I was in Ames, Iowa last week for the Kansas game. I was linking up with Curtis Jones and the Clones program. My biggest takeaway from all of it and being behind the scenes is the program culture and the togetherness that they kind of function in every single way. They're a top 3 to 5 team in the country. They're obviously super talented. They have really good pieces. They have great coaching and a great system with schematics. They truly do play with a cohesiveness and a chemistry that I can't say I've seen with majority of teams in the country. And I felt that talking to Curtis and some of the staff members and players in the facility. TJ Otzelberger has built such a good culture at Iowa State that, like, they love each other. They get along so well. They hang out all the time. Talent alone isn't enough to win you basketball games. Scheme is going to help. A great coach is going to help. But the guys playing for one another and being invested all in together is what's going to be able to get them to a Final Four or national title. Who is the most important player in the country? Interesting, because not who's the best player in the country, who's the most important. So Evan Mia has a metric called the most indispensable players in the country. So this is not going to be your MVPs, your national player of the years. It could be hypothetically, right? But impossible to disagree with the guys that are on the list. And these are numbers and the computer's kind of pumping this out. But when I think of guys who are on good enough teams that are winning to a level and their teams would crumble without them. Braden Smith at Purdue comes to mind right away. Eric Dixon, probably honestly number 1 on the list from Villanova. Cam Jones at Marquette. Ryan Nembhard at Gonzaga. Dylan Harper, honestly, I think has to be on the list at Rutgers, even though they haven't been great, which leads me to a very fun question. Is Jojo Tugler a top player this year in the country? Evan Mia says yes. Jeff Goodman says no. I'm definitely somewhere in the middle, but anybody that says that Jojo Tugler isn't awesome and isn't one of the better and more important players to their team in the country is not watching Houston games, respectfully. Now, Evan Mia's metric says that he is the number 3 player in the country, which is obviously not true. He's only scoring 6 points a game. The offensive prowess and production isn't there, but he's the best defender on the best defense in the country, and maybe he's the best defender in the country. Number 1 in block percentage and Hakeem percentage. He's super athletic and mobile and versatile, and he is just an absolute force, and he embodies the Kelvin Sampson Houston defensive mentality and just like absolute menace. Because of that lack of offensive production, or at least consistently, he definitely doesn't get enough love that he deserves. And if he did have any consistent level of offensive production, I think he'd be a lottery prospect right now for sure. But instead, he very rarely gets talked about on draft radars. But a guy like Ryan Dunn, who honestly was in a similar boat last year with Virginia, ended up turning up fine on day 1 in the NBA. So that bodes well for a guy like Jojo Tugler, who has shown that there's upside for him on offense. He has shot the ball a couple of times. To answer the question, I'd say I'm somewhere in the middle, but more towards Evan's side. Jojo Tugler is super underrated, and he should 100% be on your radars more on the college level and on the draft level. And speaking of underrated draft prospects, do you think Tahaad Pettiford deserves NBA draft buzz? I haven't seen his name in mocks. Neither have I, and I don't know why. He's young, he's electric, he's crafty, he can score on all levels, his outside shot is awesome, and his ability to create off the bounce is second to none. He is absolutely electric. He's bouncy. And last year at this point, people were going crazy about Rob Dillingham being like a top 5 prospect. So I don't know why Tahaad doesn't get mentioned as like a top 50 or 60 prospect at all. Like even in different draft classes and different levels of them, like that still doesn't add up. The math doesn't math. I see the ideology struggle of like the smaller offensive guard that isn't the greatest defender being that highly rated of a prospect, but we did it last year. And I just think Tahaad's ability and the confidence that he plays with is undeniable, and he should 100% be getting more draft attention as a first-round prospect, probably like a top 20 to 30 guy right now. Obvious answer is yes. I had no idea why Tahaad's not getting the draft buzz that he deserves. Who are some bubble teams who need to pick up slack closer to March? So I'll pull up my bracketology that I have as of today posting this video. To answer the question, I'm focusing on bubble teams that are trending down. I think in the Mountain West right away, Utah State is fine right now. I have them as a 7, but they're not going to be able to afford too many losses. San Diego State's getting dangerously close to the bubble. New Mexico is my literal last team in right now. Cannot afford to lose to lesser opponents. They can't afford to lose to the San Jose States of the conference. Baylor and UConn, I want to call out because They need to stop the trend that they're on. You think of these teams as some of the nation's best, especially UConn, obviously, and now they're in down years, 100%. On the right side of the bubble now, I have them both as 8 seeds, but if they continue to drop games like they are, they're going to get dangerously close to the bubble. They're both going to end up being in the tournament. I wouldn't be worried, but I'm just saying, like, come on now. And teams that are just out that have been losing far too often: Cincy, Indiana, Northwestern, Ohio State, Iowa, Penn State. Arkansas definitely needs to pick it up. They have been absolutely atrocious in SEC play, and that's looking pretty bad for them. Like, Coach Cal's not going to be in the tournament this year. How does SMU drop 120 against the U March contenders? I don't think SMU is a bad team at all. I actually have them just in the tournament right now in that last 4 in. I don't think they're overwhelmingly good. I don't know March contender, like contender to be in the tournament in March. 100%. They're there. Like I said, they're in the tournament as of today. But this is more on Miami. Like, they are so bad and so atrociously and embarrassingly bad and surprisingly bad. Even with Jim Larinaga stepping down at the weirdest time ever in the middle of the season, in the earlier part of the year, team has talent and ability, and they should not be this bad. 4-14 overall. Their best win is against Presbyterian. I'll say that again. Their best win is against Presbyterian. They lost to Charleston Southern. They're losing to BC, giving up 117 at home to SMU, who, again, not a bad team, but you shouldn't give up 117 in 40 minutes to anybody, not even Auburn. I still think the Miami job is an attractive one because when you think of the school, the area, they're still in the ACC, and it can be turned around pretty quickly, like other teams and coaches have shown at other schools like Louisville. But boy, is Miami bad. Oh God. That's going to do it for this week's Q&A. As always, if you're not subscribed, and especially if you're here at the end of the video, I doubt it, but hit that sub button, get the alerts. We're going to keep these pumping every week throughout the rest of the season. March is slowly approaching, so the bracketology stuff and the tournament outlook will get more of a focus as we go forward for sure. Appreciate y'all for being here. See you later. Have a good week.